There is I'm afraid at the beginning, a shameless plug for the book, because most of the work that comes out of this, or rather contributes to this paper, as a result of working on not a biography of Samuel Wesley, but a study of his life and the particular circumstances of his life. And I want to start off just with recalling the fact that Samuel Wesley's time at Oxford exactly coincided with the reign of James II, and it brought him very close, indeed face to face, with Catholicism. Samuel Wesley's loyalty to the king lasted right up to the summer of 1688, and nevertheless he moved very swiftly to accept the reign of William and Mary in 1689. In fact, one of the observations in my book is that I'm suggesting that Samuel Wesley was probably one of the few clergymen who swore an oath of allegiance when he was ordained deacon in 1688 to James II, but swore the same oath of allegiance to William and Mary in 1689 when he was admitted to the priesthood. He had experienced Catholicism close up and found the case for the revolution of 1689 very compelling in political terms and moral terms. But nevertheless, he recognized that there was an element of Stuart immorality, and under William and Mary this had been replaced by a Protestant emphasis on virtue and decency. From his appointment to Epworth in 1695, Wesley was drawn to ideas of religious societies, and he experimented with all three of the forms that were then currently available. And this paper really seeks to outline his interests in those three societies: the Society for the Reformation of Manners, the SPCK, and the parish religious societies, one of which he set up in Epworth. So in 1698, Wesley preached a sermon before the Society for the Reformation of Manners at St. James's, Piccadilly, and subsequently he repeated it at St. Bride's Church in Fleet Street. His invitation to speak came from the incumbent of both churches, Peter Birch, who was a Tory high churchman like Samuel Wesley, but in Birch's case, he was suspected of Jacobitism. The St. James's Piccadilly Society was one of 39 societies for the Reformation of Manners in London, and there were many others across the country. Each society tended to have its own interests and preoccupations. Some, usually the urban societies, concentrated on prosecution of prostitution, public indecency, and sodomy. Others were much more concerned with things like swearing, blasphemy, breaking the Sabbath, theatre going, gambling, and horse racing. From Wesley's sermon, it's clear that he shared concerns about public morals and indecent behaviour. He praised the society for its work and made strong comments about the failure of local magistrates to deal harshly with such behaviour. The magistrates' refusal to prosecute offences represented, he said, indifference to the souls of others. Public indecency, he said, was high treason against the majesty of heaven. Wesley also argued that the suppression of vice was a source of domestic happiness and contentment. If husbands and fathers supported moral behaviour, it would result in better servants, better children, and better families. And he said, render all relations much more useful and comfortable and happy. Wesley commended the work of the members of the society and claimed that they were doing God's work for which they would be rewarded. Despite this strong endorsement, Wesley soon abandoned the societies for the Reformation of Manners. And this was probably in response to the opposition of his friend, John Sharp, the Archbishop of York, who was also a high church Tory. Sharp regarded the societies for the Reformation of Manners as potentially dangerous because they often included dissenters. Sharp had refused to sanction such societies in his diocese when asked by a number of clergy. When Wesley asked Sharp's view about starting a society in Epworth, the Archbishop told him that these societies were perilous, and subsequently Wesley himself wrote that they could become, quote, a factious combination instead of a religious union. Wesley therefore turned to the SPCK, the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge, which was an exclusively Anglican body and therefore free of the taint of dissenters' involvement. Wesley was an early member of the society and was adopted as a Lincolnshire correspondent for the SPCK. He recommended it to like-minded clergy and laity. He also asked the society to send him its publications, including some of the printed forms for the prosecution of vice. These were pro forma forms that you handed to a magistrate to ask them to prosecute individuals. He also asked for books which discussed how to deal with dissenters. It was through the SPCK's books that he learned of the work of Josiah Woodward. Woodward had established religious societies in Poplar in London and had later discovered one in a parish in Kent. Woodward's book, an account of the rise and progress of religious societies, made Wesley resolve to establish such a society in Epworth, because he faced the same irreligion that Woodward described. In justifying forming such a society in his parish, Wesley claimed that the religious societies were derived from Tertullian's societies of men and women in the early church, whose purpose was to sing psalms, pray, and strengthen each other's faith. They read scripture, and they also organized relief of the poor and sick. Wesley wrote that such societies as these, quote, if further propagated, would be so far from any injury to the church, but a great advantage to it. Thinking about Harriet's paper, Wesley had another reason for the creation of religious societies. First, he argued that such societies filled a gap left by the dissolution of the monasteries. He looked further back to what he called, and this I think is a remarkable passage, the exemplary piety of the old British monks, and what indefatigable pains they took, and what hazards they ran in the conversion of our heathen ancestors, as well as how stoutly they withstood the early encroachments of Rome. The religious societies, Wesley believed, could continue the work of converting the heathens, and indeed he saw that they did so in large towns and cities. Wesley also claimed that the societies filled a gap for those who wished to, as he described it, escape the world and live a life of contemplation. Wesley noted that such a life of contemplation was endorsed by Protestant writers such as Nicholas Farrar, John Hackett, and even Archbishop Cranmer had seen a place for such a contemplative life. Wesley pointed out that for men of business, there was no opportunity to abandon the world, and so religious societies supplied a need for religious observance in the world. This, it seems, was an opportunity to straddle the world of business and contemplation. Connected with this was the opportunity for a role for the laity. Wesley argued that societies could strengthen the church, since members could assist rural deans and could even supply lay leadership roles in parishes. Moreover, the laity could visit parishioners, care for the sick, and even fulfill the role of catechist. But Wesley was careful to note that such roles could only be taken, as he put it, in subordination to the priest and with direction from him. Wesley argued that this work would staunch the flow of people leaving the church. For Wesley, another goal of the religious societies was to win dissenters back to the church. This was especially important in Epworth, where a quarter of his parishioners were Anabaptists or Quakers. And there was a national benefit of the religious societies. Wesley said that they would be useful as they would explicitly, quote, promote loyalty and obedience. He observed that by combining, Christians could be more effective. He wrote, "We see it in trades every day, and why should not we learn from those who are wise in their generation?" While Wesley acknowledged the debt of religious societies to Catholicism, he was under no illusion that they were part of a wider national anti-Catholic policy. He pointed out that the Catholic Church, he said, owes perhaps her very subsistence, at least most of the progress she has made of late years, to those several societies she nourishes in her bosom. Why may not we learn from enemies, and what better way than to fight with their own weapons? Nevertheless, Wesley clearly saw the societies as comparable to Catholic religious orders. He referred to the noble and pious Monsieur de Renty, who we're going to hear about later, who had used such religious societies in Caen, Paris, and Toulouse to great success. Nevertheless, Wesley had some reservations about parish societies. In particular, meetings in the church could become improper if they, even if they had worthwhile goals. He held that religious discussion was lawful and commendable because it was directed and led by the parson. Without that element, the direction by the parson, such meetings would become mere conventicles and might degrade into what he called chit-chat. This concern was to have potent significance in 1711, when Susanna Wesley held prayer meetings in the rectory at Epworth while Samuel was in London. So early in 1702, Wesley decided to set up his own religious society in Epworth. He started with the church choir, presumably because these were the most well-inclined members of his congregation. He shared plans with what he called the most sober and sensible young men who agreed with the idea and talked further of setting up a society. On the 7th of February 1702, Samuel Wesley called 8 people to the rectory for the first meeting. He read the rules of the society that he had drawn up and explained them. Members raised one particular concern, the injunction to read prayers twice a day in their families. The problem, they said, was that farming and other work meant that some men were up and out of their houses before the rest, and they were also kept scattered from their families during the day and evening. Wesley's response was characteristically uncompromising. He said it took only a short time to say the Lord's Prayer and a collect, but eventually he agreed to insert into the rule the words, "when it can possibly be done." All agreed that evenings rarely presented a problem, and the members undertook to read prayers and a chapter from the Bible at that time. So the members agreed and signed the rules. Within a short time, 20 more people joined the society. One of them, Wesley noted with satisfaction, was the son of an Anabaptist. Their meetings were held on Saturday evenings as a means for preparation for worship the next day. Wesley was pleased at the changes that occurred among the members. He wrote, "They forbear public houses unless their necessary occasions calls them thither. They are much more careful of their lives and conversations, communicate with great devotion, and appear very zealous to the glory of God and the welfare of their own and other souls, and often declare that they find much more comfort in this way of living and in their meetings and conferences than they could ever have expected, and long all the week until the time comes for their meeting, and love one another and their minister better than ever." Of course, there were those who scoffed at this pious society. Some of what Wesley called the chief people in Epworth laughed at the venture and said that members of Wesley's society were mainly the mean, inconsiderable men of the parish. Wesley wrote, "Those of the most wealth and best figure don't join with us." At their meetings, Wesley also distributed SPCK books, especially those which he thought would help members. He also preached one sermon each Sunday, which he used as the subject for discussion in the society at the next meeting. In this way, the meetings of the society and the parish worship dovetailed, so there was no danger of people assuming that the society was anything other than an Anglican body. The members of the society also agreed that meetings were to go ahead when at least 2 or 3 members were present. They began with prayers and a reading from the Bible, followed by a discussion of religious matters for their mutual edification. And they also discussed ways to achieve the edification of their neighbours. This final issue was the core of their business, since they committed themselves, in Wesley's words, to be Christians not only in name, but in deed, lest they should strive rashly to pull out the mote from the eyes of others, not observing the beam in their own, and lest, while they preach to others, themselves should become castaways. The issue of securing themselves as pious and self-critical was the reason for the rule not to admit new members haphazardly. The rule was that admission to the society had to be a unanimous decision of the existing members, and therefore the piety of any candidates had to be known to all, lest a little leaven should spoil the whole lump. Candidates had to be tested to ensure they were of the same mind as the existing society members. Another rule was that only 2 or 3 members would be permitted to join at one time, to avoid the society being swamped by incomers. As Wesley said, lest by any unwary charity towards all, it may happen by degrees that darkness might begin to get ground. It was also laid down that any members who were drawn to vice and wickedness, and therefore became a scandal to the society, were to be expelled. This was for fear that they would draw other members away from piety. One aspect of the Epworth Society which is noteworthy is that the membership was exclusively male. This was partly to avoid scandal, and as Wesley put it, quote, the other abuses to which promiscuous meetings cannot but be liable. Another reason was because, as Wesley said, women may hear their husbands at home and girls their parents, for 'tis a duty incumbent upon every member of these societies, next to his own soul, to be chiefly solicitous for those of his family. It was clear that Samuel Wesley felt that husbands and masters should be examples of Christian piety to their wives, daughters, and servants. The members of the society paid a small subscription according to their means, and the money raised was to be spent on the purchase of religious tracts and books. Wesley said that such books could come from Holland and Germany, as well as England, and that the funds could be used to translate and print them for distribution among the parishioners, and especially among those who had not yet responded to the call to piety. Wesley also laid down that the society should be in contact with other such parish societies in England and abroad, quote, so they may mutually edify one another. He wrote that such a correspondence would enable the best ways to promote religion to be circulated and shared. A final activity of the societies and a use for their funds was the care of the sick and other poor, to afford them spiritual as well as corporal help. Despite his early optimistic claims, Wesley's society in Epworth was not a great success and didn't in the end attract large numbers. It disappeared from his writings after 1705, when the possibility of setting up a charity school emerged, and this took all of his energies. However, Wesley retained an interest in religious societies. In 1723, Thomas Hearne recorded that Samuel Wesley told him about a manuscript that he owned that listed all the orders of nuns. But the possibility of parish societies filling a role previously held by what Wesley called old British monks, and providing a contemplative opportunity in the world, was undoubtedly a novel and imaginative venture. Perhaps also in Wesley's early venture, we might be able to see an antecedent of his son's later society.